The Strait of Hormuz occupies a unique and critical position in the global security and economic system. At its narrowest point, the strait is only about 21 miles wide, yet it carries close to one-fifth of the world's daily oil supply. Every day, tens of millions of barrels of crude oil pass through this narrow waterway, linking the energy producers of the Middle East to global markets in Asia, Europe, and North America. Any disruption in this corridor has immediate and far-reaching consequences, affecting fuel prices, supply chains, financial markets, and geopolitical stability. Because of this, the Strait of Hormuz is not merely a regional passageway. It is one of the most strategically sensitive maritime choke points on Earth. Iran controls the northern coastline of the strait and has leveraged its geographic advantage for decades as a tool of political pressure. Since the late 20th century, Iranian leaders have repeatedly declared that if Iran's own oil exports were threatened, they would respond by closing the strait to all shipping. These threats were designed to deter sanctions, influence negotiations, and remind the international community of Iran's ability to disrupt global energy flows. While such statements were often dismissed as rhetoric, they nonetheless forced military planners around the world to treat the region as a persistent flashpoint, where miscalculation could quickly escalate into open conflict. In recent years, tensions surrounding the strait had intensified significantly. International sanctions, regional proxy conflicts, and confrontations between Iran and Western powers increased pressure on Tehran. In response, Iran expanded its naval capabilities in the region, focusing heavily on asymmetric warfare tactics. Rather than competing directly with large Western navies, Iran invested in coastal missile batteries, fast attack boats, naval mines, and missile-equipped patrol vessels designed to exploit the confined geography of the strait. The goal was simple: create uncertainty, raise the cost of passage, and demonstrate that no foreign vessel could move through the strait without Iranian approval. Against this backdrop, the United States maintained a firm and consistent position. Washington rejected Iran's claims of authority over international waters and reaffirmed that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open to all lawful maritime traffic. To reinforce this position, the U.S. Navy conducted regular freedom of navigation operations, escorting commercial vessels and maintaining a visible presence in the region. These operations were not intended as provocations, but as demonstrations of international maritime law, emphasizing that no single nation could unilaterally control such a vital global waterway. However, by the time the USS Mason received its orders, the situation had grown more dangerous than usual. Intelligence reports indicated a noticeable increase in Iranian naval activity along the northern coast of the strait. Missile batteries had been repositioned, patrols intensified, and Iranian Revolutionary Guard naval units were conducting aggressive maneuvers near shipping lanes. Surveillance assets detected heightened communications traffic, suggesting operational planning rather than routine patrols. While the exact nature of Iran's intentions remained unclear, it was evident that tensions were reaching a critical threshold. The USS Mason, an Arleigh Burke class guided missile destroyer, was selected for a high-risk escort mission under these conditions. The task was straightforward in principle but dangerous in execution: escort the oil tanker Pacific Endeavor safely through the Strait of Hormuz and ensure its uninterrupted passage. Such escorts were a core component of U.S. naval strategy in the region, designed to reassure allies, deter aggression, and prevent Iran from establishing de facto control over commercial shipping. Both the destroyer and the tanker entered the strait during daylight hours, a decision that carried both advantages and risks. Daylight provided excellent visibility for navigation, surveillance, and coordination, but also meant that every movement was clearly observable from the Iranian coast. Radar systems, optical sensors, patrol vessels, and even civilian observers could track the progress of both ships as they moved through the narrow channel. There was no element of surprise, no concealment, and no ambiguity. The presence of the USS Mason was a deliberate, visible statement that the United States would not be intimidated into altering lawful maritime operations. The crew of the Mason was fully aware of the environment they were entering. Elevated readiness levels were ordered, and all weapon systems were placed on standby. The mission was conducted with the understanding that harassment, intimidation, or even direct confrontation was possible. Yet despite these risks, the operation proceeded as planned. From the American perspective, backing down would have set a dangerous precedent, signaling that threats alone could restrict international navigation. What made this particular transit especially significant was not just the presence of Iranian forces, but the broader strategic implications of any confrontation. A successful Iranian challenge could have emboldened further attempts to disrupt shipping, while a strong U.S. response carried the risk of escalation into a wider conflict. Both sides understood that the stakes extended far beyond a single destroyer or tanker. The credibility of deterrence, the stability of global energy markets, and enforcement of international maritime law were all on the line. As the USS Mason and the Pacific Endeavor continued through the strait, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. The ships moved steadily forward, adhering to established shipping lanes, while Iranian military assets watched closely from shore and sea. At this stage, no shots had been fired, but the strategic chessboard was fully set. Every radar scan, every patrol movement, and every command decision carried weight. The Strait of Hormuz, long a symbol of potential conflict, was once again proving why it remained one of the most dangerous and consequential waterways in the world. Iran's decision to initiate a direct attack on the USS Mason marked a dramatic and deliberate escalation in the long-running standoff over the Strait of Hormuz. Unlike previous encounters that relied on harassment, shadowing, or limited provocations, this operation was designed as a decisive and overwhelming ambush. It was planned not under cover of darkness, but in broad daylight, when every movement could be clearly observed. This choice reflected Iran's confidence that geography, numbers, and surprise through coordination would compensate for the technological superiority of the American destroyer. The narrow confines of the Strait of Hormuz played a central role in Iranian planning. With limited maneuvering space and heavy commercial traffic, the strait restricts the ability of large warships to evade threats or disengage quickly. Iranian commanders believed that by attacking at the narrowest point, they could create a closed kill zone in which the USS Mason would be surrounded on all sides. Coastal missile batteries could strike from the north, fast attack boats could swarm from multiple directions, and missile-equipped corvettes could block any potential escape route. In theory, the destroyer would be trapped, overwhelmed by sheer volume of fire before it could fully respond. The ambush was carefully synchronized. Iranian coastal defense units activated multiple anti-ship missile batteries positioned along the northern shoreline. These systems had been deployed weeks earlier and were already calibrated to cover key transit corridors. Their radar systems locked onto the USS Mason, tracking its speed, heading, and distance in real time. At sea, fast attack boats launched from Bandar Abbas and surrounding ports, accelerating toward the strait at high speed. These vessels, small and agile, were armed with short-range anti-ship missiles and heavy machine guns, intended to saturate the destroyer's defenses from close range. Simultaneously, 3 larger missile-equipped corvettes moved into intercept positions. These ships carried heavier anti-ship missiles capable of causing severe damage to a destroyer if they struck. Their role was to add weight to the attack and prevent the USS Mason from breaking contact or maneuvering out of the engagement area. From Iran's perspective, this 3-layered assault, land-based missiles, fast attack boats, and corvettes represented the optimal method to neutralize a technologically advanced adversary in confined waters. The timing of the attack was deliberate and precise. Iranian forces waited until the USS Mason and the oil tanker Pacific Endeavor were fully committed to the transit, deep enough into the strait that turning back would be slow and risky. At that point, the order was given. Coastal missile batteries launched their first salvo, sending long-range anti-ship missiles streaking low over the water. Almost simultaneously, fast attack boats fired multiple missiles of their own, while the corvettes launched heavier weapons from farther out. Within moments, dozens of missiles were airborne, converging on a single target. The sheer scale of the attack was unprecedented in the modern era. Never before had so many anti-ship missiles been launched simultaneously at a single U.S. naval vessel. Radar screens aboard the USS Mason filled with incoming tracks, while missile plumes were visible even to the naked eye in the clear afternoon sky. The attack was impossible to conceal. It was witnessed by satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, commercial vessels, and observers along the Iranian coast. This visibility was intentional. Iran wanted the world to see what it believed would be a decisive blow against American naval power. Iranian commanders believed that the USS Mason's defensive systems, no matter how advanced, could be overwhelmed by numbers alone. Anti-missile interceptors are finite, reaction time is limited, and close-in defenses can only engage threats within a narrow window. By launching dozens of missiles from multiple directions and ranges, Iran hoped to saturate every defensive layer at once. Even if many missiles were intercepted, a few successful hits, they believed, would be enough to cripple or sink the destroyer. Beyond the military objective, the attack carried immense symbolic weight. Sinking a U.S. destroyer in the Strait of Hormuz would have represented the most significant blow to American naval prestige in decades. It would have demonstrated that Iran could impose costs on U.S. forces operating near its coastline and challenge American dominance in the region. Capturing the oil tanker would have amplified the impact even further, providing Iran with leverage over global energy markets and forcing international attention on its demands. The choice to attack in daylight also reflected Iran's confidence in its control of the battle space. Iranian forces believed they had full situational awareness, supported by coastal radar, visual observation, and pre-positioned assets. They assumed that U.S. support elements were too distant to intervene in time, and that the engagement would be decided within minutes. In their calculation, the USS Mason would be isolated, damaged beyond recovery, and forced to surrender or sink before outside assistance could arrive. What Iran did not fully account for was the depth of U.S. preparation and integration across domains. While the destroyer appeared alone on the surface, it was part of a much larger operational framework involving air power, submarines, and long-range strike assets. The ambush, intended as a decisive opening move, instead became the trigger for a much wider confrontation. Yet at the moment the missiles were launched, Iranian forces believed they were executing a flawless plan. As the missiles closed in and the attack boats surged forward, the Strait of Hormuz transformed from a tense but controlled transit corridor into an active battlefield. The air filled with exhaust trails and radar emissions, the sea churned with fast-moving vessels, and the USS Mason faced the most intense assault any American warship had encountered in generations. The attack marked a clear break from deterrence and signaling into open combat, signaling that the long-simmering confrontation over the strait had entered a dangerous and irreversible phase. Despite sustaining direct missile impacts, the USS Mason remained combat-capable, and that fact alone immediately altered the trajectory of the engagement. Fires burned on deck, damage control teams worked under extreme pressure, and casualties were being treated below. Yet the destroyer's core systems remained functional. Its radar, communications, and weapons platforms continued to operate, allowing it to transmit real-time targeting data and request support. What Iran had expected to be a rapid and decisive kill instead became the trigger for a vast and highly coordinated American military response. The U.S. response unfolded across multiple domains almost simultaneously, demonstrating the depth of American operational integration. Within a moment of confirmation that the USS Mason had been struck, U.S. Central Command activated pre-positioned contingency plans. Naval aviation, submarines, and long-range bombers, already monitoring the region due to elevated tensions, were cleared to engage. This response was not improvised. It was the execution of a doctrine built around speed, redundancy, and overwhelming force. Naval air power was the first to arrive in strength. Fighter aircraft from a nearby carrier strike group were already airborne or on immediate alert when the attack occurred. Within minutes, strike fighters crossed into the engagement zone at high speed, guided by targeting information from a Mason, airborne surveillance platforms, and satellite feeds. From a pilot's perspective, the battlefield was unmistakable. A U.S. destroyer burning but fighting, Iranian vessels maneuvering aggressively, and missile launches visible across sea and sky. American aircraft prioritized threats that posed the most immediate danger. Iranian missile-equipped corvettes were identified as high-value targets due to their firepower and command capabilities. Precision anti-ship missiles were released from standoff range, allowing U.S. aircraft to strike without entering the envelope of remaining Iranian defenses. The effect was swift and decisive. Iranian corvettes were struck almost simultaneously, suffering catastrophic damage that left them burning, breaking apart, and sinking in open view of the coastline they had launched from. Attention then shifted to the fast attack boats swarming the area. These vessels, while smaller, represented a serious threat due to their numbers and proximity. U.S. aircraft engaged them using a combination of precision-guided munitions and cannon fire, exploiting superior sensors and coordination. One by one, the boats were destroyed, disabled, or left burning in the water. What had been an aggressive swarm rapidly collapsed into scattered wreckage, with surviving crews unable to regroup or coordinate further action. At the same time, the underwater dimension of the response was activated. U.S. submarines that had been operating silently in the region were cleared to engage strategic targets. These platforms, undetected by Iranian forces, launched cruise missiles against coastal missile batteries and command facilities. The missiles struck with precision, eliminating radar systems, launch platforms, and communications nodes that had enabled the initial ambush. With each impact, Iran's ability to continue or coordinate attacks degraded further. Long-range bombers added another layer to the response. Operating at high altitude and well beyond the reach of Iranian air defenses, they delivered precision-guided munitions against military infrastructure tied to naval operations in the Strait of Hormuz. These strikes targeted ammunition depots, logistics hubs, radar installations, and command centers. The objective was not only to stop the current attack, but to neutralize Iran's capacity to conduct similar operations in the near future. The speed and accuracy of these strikes reflected years of planning focused on rapid escalation control. Electronic warfare played a critical role throughout the counterstrike. Specialized aircraft and naval systems jammed Iranian radar and communications networks, disrupting targeting data and isolating units from higher command. Iranian operators found their sensors unreliable, their communications intermittent or completely severed. This electronic blindness compounded the physical destruction being inflicted, leaving Iranian forces unable to assess the battlefield, issue coherent orders, or respond effectively to unfolding events. The integration of intelligence assets ensured that no significant Iranian movement went unnoticed. Satellites, drones, maritime patrol aircraft, and ship-based sensors fed a continuous stream of information into a shared operational picture. Targets were identified, prioritized, and struck in rapid succession. This level of coordination allowed U.S. forces to maintain tempo, denying Iran any opportunity to pause, adapt, or regroup. From a strategic standpoint, the American counterstrike sent a clear message. The response was not limited to defensive measures or symbolic retaliation. It was designed to decisively remove Iran's ability to contest the strait militarily. By striking not only the attacking units but also the infrastructure that supported them, the United States demonstrated that any attempt to challenge freedom of navigation would result in consequences far beyond immediate engagement. Throughout this phase, the USS Mason continued to play an active role. Even while damaged, it launched precision weapons of its own and provided critical command and control support. Its survival and continued resistance undermined the central assumption of the Iranian plan, that overwhelming initial force would neutralize the destroyer before external support could arrive. Instead, the Mason became the anchor around which a much larger operation unfolded. Within a remarkably short span of time, the balance of power and engagement shifted completely. Iranian naval forces transitioned from attackers to targets, and their coastal defenses were systematically dismantled. What began as a bold attempt to assert control over the Strait of Hormuz quickly became a demonstration of the risks inherent in confronting a technologically superior and globally integrated military force. As smoke rose from destroyed vessels and shattered facilities, it became clear that the U.S. counterstrike was not merely reactive, but deliberately overwhelming. The purpose was not escalation for its own sake, but the restoration of deterrence through unmistakable dominance. By the end of this phase, Iranian forces in the immediate area were no longer capable of sustained combat operations, and the momentum of the conflict had shifted